For 30 years, Johnny Carson dominated late-night TV with The Tonight Show. Night after night, millions of viewers watched the witty banter, the KFAS, and the legendary guests who occupied his iconic couch. Everyone understood that appearing on Carson's show was a make-or-break proposition for an act's career. But what viewers did not know was which guests Johnny enjoyed most in his heart. For years, his personal favorites remained a mystery, tucked away behind that sly smile of his. Among the guests he cherished most, one particular choice left everyone stunned. And no, it's not who you'd expect. Early life and career. Johnny Carson, destined to be late-night television's king, was born on October 23, 1925 in Corning, Iowa. His mother, Ruth Elizabeth, and his father, Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, a power company manager, were his parents. Johnny had an older sister and a younger brother, Richard, who would follow him into television. As a child, the family traveled throughout Iowa before eventually moving to Norfolk, Nebraska, when Johnny was 8 years old. That's where his passion for entertaining first began to develop. At age 12, while at a friend's house, he found a book on magic and eventually sent away for a magician's kit. With that set, he practiced card magic day and night, frequently annoying his family by exclaiming, "Pick a card, any card." His mother even fashioned him a cape. And in no time, he was doing magic tricks for crowds. He started performing at age 14 as the Great Carson for $3 per show at local clubs. After completing high school, Carson hitchhiked to Hollywood in pursuit of his aspirations. He is said to have once been fined $50 for impersonating a midshipman. Although this anecdote has frequently been disputed, at the outbreak of World War II, Carson enrolled in the United States Navy in 1943. He trained under the V-12 Navy College program at Columbia University and Millsaps College before becoming an ensign. He served aboard the USS Pennsylvania as a communications officer, decrypting top-secret messages. Carson was also a master amateur boxer, sporting a 15:01 record with most fights being held on the ship. Later in his life, he would say that his most proud Navy moment was when he did a magic trick for James Forstall, the Secretary of the Navy. That trick gave him confidence that he could entertain anyone, no matter how tough the audience. Following the war, Carson utilized the GI Bill and attended the University of Nebraska. He initially majored in journalism before switching to speech and drama due to a desire to become involved with radio. He even wrote his college thesis on comedy, examining radio skits and how to create humor. He graduated in 1949 with a degree in radio and speech. He began his career at a local television and radio station in Omaha in 1950 where he immediately demonstrated his flair for quick-witted improvisation. He transferred to Los Angeles where comedian Red Skelton recognized his potential and gave him a job as a writer. Carson substituted for Skelton one night during a live show which provided an added boost to his name. Soon enough, Jack Benny asked him to be a guest on his show for a rosy career for the young comedian. Carson anchored several shows in the 1950s, among them The Johnny Carson Show and the game show Who Do You Trust?, where he first got to know his future sidekick Ed McMahon. By 1962, NBC finally prevailed in convincing Carson to host The Tonight Show, though he had shown some reluctance initially. This move rewrote television history forever. Carson's feud with Wayne Newton. Back in 1980, Johnny Carson was making headlines, not for a humorous monologue, but for a falling out with Wayne Newton. Here's how it went down. Carson was set to purchase the Aladdin Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, but at the 11th hour, he withdrew from the deal. A consortium led by Wayne Newton stepped in and bought the property instead. Naturally, the press spun the story as Carson losing the deal, and that did not make him happy. According to lawyer Henry Bushkin, Carson grew irked by all the rumors and started making jokes about Newton on The Tonight Show. Those jokes began a feud between the two performers. Newton didn't let it slide. Years later on Larry King Live, he went off script. Johnny Carson is a mean-spirited human being and there are people that he has hurt that people will never know about, and for some reason at some point he decided to turn that kind of negative attention toward me and I refused to have it. Newton's rage wasn't merely hot air. He later said that he went on to Carson's office at NBC and threatened to pummel him unless Carson ceased mocking him in public. It's a pretty vivid image. Newton confronting Carson, insisting that the joke cease. What is surprising is how out of character it was for Carson to find himself in such an overt public battle with someone he had teased. Most of the time, his barbs remained safely within the domain of satire and comedy. But not this time. Newton's confrontation reveals how finely calibrated the scale was between humor and offense, particularly when there were large amounts of money, pride, and ego at stake. This feud also reveals something more profound about Carson. His hypersensitivity to image, particularly when he believed he had been cornered by the media. When they implied he lost the Aladdin business, he took it personally. Rather than let it drop, he used his bully pulpit on television to strike back. And Newton struck back. This confrontation isn't just good dirt. It tells us something about what Carson valued: reputation, respect, and how he was perceived by others. And if someone crossed a line, real or imagined, he would strike back in ways that involved more than a quick joke. Now, let's reveal those 10 guests who were loved the most by Johnny Carson. 1. Steve Martin. Steve Martin was not merely another comedian who came by Carson's couch. He became a favorite of Carson's. Throughout the years, Martin regularly appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. So much so that his name is included among the regulars whom the network still features in its featured guest series. What made Martin such a great fit was his style. Slightly wild, slightly crazy, always unexpected. He combined stand-up, banjo playing, offbeat jokes, and even balloon animals in some routines. Carson enjoyed guests who added their own zing, and Martin certainly did. The Johnny Carson official website itself states that Steve Martin was more than just a wild and crazy guy. He was also a favorite guest of Johnny Carson. Since he appeared so regularly, Martin became one of those visitors the viewers anticipated and waited to see. When Steve Martin appeared, they knew they were in for a good time and a surprise. Through the years, Martin's visits became part of The Tonight Show identity. He was not a guest, but a regular treat. And it's telling too that in the featured guests DVD set, which collects the most memorable Tonight Show episodes, Martin is one of the names selected for special treatment. Selection of that type doesn't come from popularity. It comes from respect and love for what he contributed to the show. Another hint: viewership was often increased by Martin's appearance. His guest spots and interviews lingered in the minds of fans, posted on highlight reels, and referenced in anniversary sets of Carson's finest work. You can find most of Martin's Tonight Show segments brought together in a YouTube playlist devoted to Steve Martin on Johnny Carson. Steve Martin received so many invitations because he wasn't only funny. He was unpredictable, innovative, and someone Carson really enjoyed watching and talking to. For decades, Martin made The Tonight Show more than a talk show. He made it an experience. And that's one of the most obvious indicators that Carson included him among his favorites. 2. David Briner. David Briner was one of the names you'd always expect to pop up when Johnny Carson turned on The Tonight Show. He wasn't just a guest once in a while. He showed up more than 150 times during the 1970s and 80s, making him the most frequent guest during Carson's reign. It was his comedic approach that made Briner unique. He wasn't about outrageous stunts or boisterous jokes. He was all about observational humor, laughing at the kind of things people experience daily but do not often discuss. Family foibles, sitting in traffic, growing older, odd news stories, the kind of thing that could be appreciated by millions. Carson clearly admired this format a great deal, as Briner was frequently invited to stand up and perform a complete stand-up comedy set instead of merely repartee on the couch. His visits weren't mere laughs, they counted for his career. What happened, according to interviews, is that following his first appearance on The Tonight Show in January of 1971, Briner's life took a turn. He came from struggling, nearly penniless, to receiving buckets and buckets of offers, comedy clubs, television work overnight. Another indication that Carson approved of him: Carson trusted Briner enough to have him stand in for him. Briner guest hosted frequently, approximately 70 times by some estimates, when Carson was not around. It indicates that Carson did not merely enjoy Briner's humor. He trusted him to host the show. Individuals familiar with comedy indicate that Briner assisted in shaping late-night humor. Comedians such as Richard Lewis referred to him as godfather of hip observational comedy. He influenced individuals such as Jerry Seinfeld, Paul Reiser, and many more. 3. Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney Dangerfield wasn't merely funny. He was unforgettable. His catchphrase, "I don't get no respect," became a part of American comedy heritage. And Carson plainly relished what Dangerfield had to offer: The Tonight Show. A sign of how much Carson enjoyed Dangerfield is how much Rodney appeared. He appeared on The Tonight Show numerous times, more than 30 by one calculation, and always killed, getting up, playing his part, sitting down and joshing with Carson and Ed McMahon. Viewers never grew weary of him. What distinguished Dangerfield was his manner. Self-deprecating, on the sharp side, relentless in one-liners, and extremely relatable. He made his disrespecting an asset. The people watched a man who made light of being second best all the time. Being disrespected in small, ridiculous ways. Trucks, marriage, getting old, and loved it because it was so universal. Everyone's ever had a moment when they felt ignored. And Dangerfield made those moments laughable. Carson's responses during Dangerfield's visits also speak volumes. Accounts and videos depict Carson himself laughing hysterically, sometimes perhaps even harder than the audience, and evidently obviously enjoying the repartee. It wasn't all rehearsed bits. Carson would initiate subjects, pose hooks, and frequently acted as the straight man admirably to allow Dangerfield's gags to hit the mark just so. Years later on Larry King Live, he went off script. 1980 was Rodney's banner year. His comedy recording No Respect was a Grammy winner. In addition, the film Caddyshack was released that same year and solidified Dangerfield as more than merely a stand-up legend, but rather a mainstream comedy icon. The Johnny Carson featured guests DVDs make the observation. They contain full performances and bonus segments from Rodney at his finest. Carson provided him with spotlight time, which implies respect. 4. Bob Hope. Bob Hope is an American legend. By the time Johnny Carson was the king of late-night television, Hope had already been a household name for decades. Radio, movies, USO tours, you name it. So when Carson began The Tonight Show, having a guest like Hope on the program lent credibility. He was one of the most requested, most recognized visitors ever. According to the archives from the Library of Congress, Bob Hope was seen over 100 times throughout Carson's 30 years on The Tonight Show. That's enormous. Fewer than even comedians and other guests were as regular. His appearances spanned decades, demonstrating that both NBC and the public thought of him as somebody special. Despite that frequency, the Carson-Hope relationship wasn't one of easy admiration. In Hope, Entertainer of the Century, Richard Zaglin, and in People magazine, there's a repeated refrain. Carson respected Hope's position in show business, his legacy, but he didn't always get along with the way Hope operated. One source of tension was that the Hope tended to appear to plug his specials or show highlights from them, typically in a scripted fashion with gag one-liners and rehearsed routines. Carson, who appreciated spontaneity, humor, and dialogue, apparently didn't always love this format. Carson felt that Hope's shows became formulaic. Same format, same type of jokes, even extended reels of promotional footage that lasted longer than Carson or the producers at Tonight liked. Peter Lasley, a longtime producer of The Tonight Show, put it nicely. Johnny admired Hope's place in show business, but he was not a great admirer of his work. Hope had seniority both at NBC and in American comedy. Hope was a huge network star before Carson. That meant that when Hope wished to appear publicly on Tonight's show, he generally could. Carson is described as responding again when producers told him of another request by Hope, but then replying, "You can't tell him no." In later years, Hope's aging affected his appearance. Reports say that his eyesight and hearing were declining, which caused more difficulties during interviews, sometimes missing cues, failing to follow questions properly, or relying heavily on prepared materials and scripts. Carson supposedly found that harder to work with. 5. Don Rickles. Don Rickles bore the nickname Mr. Warmth, but referring to him as warm would perhaps be an exaggeration. He was closer to being the insult comedy king. He possessed a talent for quick wit and he could dish out barbs of humor on anyone there and back again. Audience members, other celebrities, even Johnny Carson himself. Because of that, or maybe despite that, Rickles eventually became one of Carson's favorite repeat guests. One large hint is that The Tonight Show's featured guest series devotes Volume 1 to Rickles, pointing out that he was a favorite guest, and Carson enjoyed allowing him to do his thing. That tells us a great deal. To place him first in that series demonstrates respect and affection for what Rickles contributed. Rickles made many appearances on Carson's program. His approach, spontaneous, sharp, unpredictable, was an ideal counterpoint to more scripted talk show spots. He was provocative, but never really mean or cruel. There was always timing and wit involved. A well-known incident serves to demonstrate their on-again, off-again relationship. The cigarette box incident. In 1976, when Bob Newhart was guest hosting Tonight Show, Rickles performed a bid on Carson's wooden cigarette box as a prop, bashing it along the way. The following evening, after Carson came back, Carson stormed into Rickles' adjacent studio where he was taping to confront him and offer comedic pushback. He joked, referred to Rickles as a big dummy, and recreated a mock slap before returning to his own show. Was this actual anger or good theater? Rickles himself later admitted that the initial breakage was an accident. But Rickles and Carson played up the drama. That sort of pushed and pulled tension, feigned anger, contrived confrontation betrays something deeper. Carson trusted Rickles to the point that he let that sort of moment occur. He created space for comedic tension and let Rickles be Rickles. Rickles' comedy was not merely about putting people down. There was also heart involved. He could be biting yet he appreciated timing, respect, and context. His forwardness paid off because you felt he respected his target as well. That's one reason audiences and Carson kept bringing him back. 6. Robin Williams. Robin Williams wasn't only hilarious, he was a whirlwind of energy, impossible to predict, and one of the guests Carson obviously adored having around. As the featured guest series on the Johnny Carson official website states, Williams was a guest on The Tonight Show 9 times. Each appearance lit up the screen with what the website calls comedy magic. His initial appearance in 1981 is the stuff of legend. From the get-go, he won over Johnny with that trademark high-energy act and a sort of stream of consciousness humor that had the audience and Carson in stitches. What's remarkable about Williams is that Carson trusted him to the extent of letting him wander around inside the interview. Fewer formal questions, more give and take. There are several episodes where Carson simply let Robin go off-book, riff, do impressions, tell anecdotes, mimic voices, and Robin never squandered the leeway. The audience adored it. Carson clearly did, too. One of the most revealing moments, May 21, 1992, just before Carson's penultimate show, Robin Williams was selected as one of his last 2 guests. The other was Bette Midler. That indicates how much Carson esteemed him. He did not simply want someone who could be funny to wrap up the era. He wanted someone who worked at comedy in a way that he deeply respected, bold, improvisational, big with guile. For instance, during a 1982 guest spot, July 22, 1982, Williams was on and within seconds was in full stride. Jokes, impressions, energy. Carson frequently had to transition from host mode to becoming something of a partner in the mayhem, playing the straight man so Robin could bounce off his lines. 7. Tony Randall. If ever a person were to ask who most frequently guested on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, Tony Randall's name would be near the top. At the time of his death, Randall had made approximately 105 guest spots on Carson's show, more than nearly any other celebrity. That lots of guestings mean that 2 things are true. Randall was highly sought after, and Carson clearly loved having him around. It's not simply a matter of seat filling. When a guest returns repeatedly, there is generally some chemistry. And Randall had it. He was intelligent, articulate, frequently humorous without being obnoxious, and possessed a range that enabled him to both be serious and be funny. One amusing quote from Randall illustrates how professional but also somewhat detached the relationship was. He once explained, "I was on the Johnny Carson show, I believe 114 or 104 times, and aside from those times on the air, I never spoke to him. I never met him." That implies that even though he was such a regular visitor, the bulk of the interaction was on camera. It's a reminder that show business sometimes brings people close when the cameras are rolling and farther apart when they're not. Randall also possessed some characteristics and interests that rendered him a unique guest. For instance, he frequently discussed his passion for opera, even explaining in detail how operas had risque or salacious storylines. That touch of blending high culture with humor added depth to his interviews. He wasn't merely selling his TV or film projects. He'd introduce his quirky interests. Another observation, Randall was reputed to be finicky, meticulous, nearly obsessive about his ways. There is a contrast between his Felix character, neat at times OCD from The Odd Couple, and the character he portrayed off-screen where he was said to be equally exacting in real life. That aspect of his personality was evident in interviews. So, the exchanges with Carson were more nuanced. Some of the humor derived from Randall's stories about being neat or being critical or about things the way they ought to be. It made him endearing in a most human sense. 8. Joan Embry. Joan Embry is not a stand-up comedian or a film actress. She's an animal and conservationist activist who used to feature live animals on The Tonight Show. And as far as all available evidence shows, Carson and his viewers adored those moments. As her Wikipedia entry indicates, during her extensive career, she and her animal ambassadors appeared on Johnny Carson's program almost 70 times. Embry herself has stated that if you count in some extra appearances, then the figure is around 100. Her spots were unique in that they weren't merely cute animals on stage. These were explosive moments. Animals may do strange things, shock Carson, or simply act in a manner that leaves everyone laughing or gasping. Such as during one visit, a pygmy marmoset leapt from Emmy's arm onto Carson's arm, then to his shoulder, atop his head, and even marked its territory by urinating on him live on television. That sort of spontaneous, slightly anorectic moment is precisely what kept talk shows alive. One night, Embry brought a bullfrog that did something surprising, a bit gift on the show. There's also a short video clip called Joan Embry's Cheetahs Are Not Fans of Johnny from her visit in 1974. These were the kind of moments when viewers leaned forward. You never really knew what the animal or Carson would do next. Her show website even features a best-of montage of Joan Embry's numerous animal visits to The Tonight Show, highlighting how frequently and how affectionately her segments were remembered. Embry's job introduced an alternate flavor to The Tonight Show roster. The majority of the guests were usually actors, comedians, musicians. It was uncommon to have someone from the zoo or wildlife community as a guest. It provided a break for Carson and the audience, a less scripted, more unpolished thing. Carson's ease with Emmy's bits demonstrates confidence. Allowing live animals on stage is dangerous. There are no assurances. But Carson didn't shy away from that danger. He coursed through it. The fact that Emery had repeated invitations indicates that Carson off-camera liked having those moments. He surely liked the way her presence added a little of the untamed, the unexpected, and some real awe to his manicured late-night show. 9. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was not merely a guest on The Tonight Show. He was an occasion. When Frank arrived, audiences leaned forward because interviews with him were heavy with a seriousness that transcended mere promotion or chat. Carson appreciated that. He handled Sinatra differently. Sinatra's guest spots on the show were unforgettable for their combination of music, celebrity presence, and more serious discussion. In one significant episode, November 12, 1976, Sinatra sang and also chatted with Carson about his life and career. That sort of double life, singer and chatroom visitor, made their conversation feel serious. Sinatra was a legend, and Carson understood how to make that moment breathe. Letting Sinatra sing his stuff while also having a meaningful conversation. Aside from the performance, having Sinatra on the show raised its stature. To have a legend on Carson's stage made a statement. This was a host whose reputation and audience could command the biggest stars. Carson responded with difference. He did not hurry Sinatra along, did not seek to upstage him. Rather, he presented himself as a good interviewer, posing questions that allowed Sinatra to think, to expose, and to reminisce. Some of the reasons Sinatra resonated so deeply with Carson and with viewers was that he added depth. The public heard the smooth voice, the glamour, the legend. But Carson had a talent for looking beneath the surface, asking about motives, regrets, memory, and meaning. That room for vulnerability made their interviews meaningful. Sinatra's gravitas added gravitas, and Carson's patience allowed its space to fall. Also, Sinatra's reputation meant that Carson probably felt a combination of respect and modesty. He wasn't interviewing any ordinary celebrity. He was interviewing Frank Sinatra. That had to shape the way he conducted the interview. The atmosphere was always different, more subdued, more measured, less silly. Though there was still room for humor, the atmosphere changed because Sinatra's presence made it do so. 10. Bette Midler. Bette Midler wasn't merely another singing sensation on The Tonight Show. When she came on with Johnny Carson, she brought more feeling, creativity, and moments people speak about decades later. One of the largest hints that Carson respected Midler is the way she was treated during his last campaign. On May 21, 1992, the second-to-last show of The Tonight Show, Carson selected Robin Williams and Bette Midler as his final two guests. That evening is now vintage TV, in part because of the way that Carson and Midler interacted. On that evening's show, Midler and Carson sang a semi-impromptu duet of Here's That Rainy Day, a favorite of Carson's. She remembered words to half the chorus, began singing it, and Carson harmonized. Next, subsequently, she performed a chilling version of One for My Baby and One More for the Road. The manner in which she performed it from the center stage softly with emotion, and Carson's observation of her, physically moved, produced a moment of unvarnished connection that resonated with many spectators profoundly. Midler's work on that show was honored. She won an Emmy Award in 1992 for her performance during that penultimate episode, a signal that it wasn't just emotional, but also artistically powerful. Their chemistry during that night proved why Carson was a fan of Midler. She knew when to be funny, when to sing, when to stop. She had control of both entertainment and emotion. In the OUP blog, the portion is written nearly as the Bette Midler show that evening because she was allotted time for various performances, comedy skits, and tribute acts. Midler too had a history with Carson. A Tonight Show visit from the early 70s features Carson welcoming her with warmth as he remembers her initial appearance on his show. With time, her subsequent visits became more than publicity tours. They became occasions of mutual respect between two artists who knew show business, timing, and feeling. And that wraps up today's story. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more amazing moments from Johnny Carson's legendary show, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more of these unforgettable stories. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.